I'm Panikos Panayi and I'm Professor of European History at Montfort University. The book I'd like to talk about today is Bilder aus der Gosnischen Kultmission, or if we translate that, is 50 pictures out of the Gosnerischen, which is the name of the person who set up the missionary organization. It's published in 1894. The book is celebrating the 50th anniversary of the arrival of Gosner missionaries in the Coles mission. So the 19th century can be regarded as a great age of missionary activity, and Germans were one of the countries that sent out many missionaries. They're fairly self-contained, and once they're allowed to operate on their own, then they remain quite distinct from any British missionary organisations. They have very little to do with any British administration, which is quite laissez-faire anyway. They set up what are called mission stations. So the mission station is where the missionaries exist, if you like, and then they move out from there in order to carry out their conversions. The German missionaries do their own thing as much as possible, and the group they have to interact with is the Indians, because they're the ones who they need to convert. And so they initially use intermediaries, and then gradually, once they've mastered the language, they can go out and preach themselves. But it's a really complicated process. The book is essentially an outline of all the things the Gosner missions have done in this area. Their arrival, their churches, their mission stations, their schools, their activity amongst lepers, and it's really heavily illustrated. They're most proud of the fact that they're handing over their activity to Indians. Some of the most interesting pictures within the book are actually of Indian catechists and Indian pastors. I found that especially interesting, that they have all these photographs of Indians who are now doing the work that they originally wanted to carry out. So I guess it's a way of demonstrating how successful their activity was. There's also pictures of their churches, their headquarters in the various missionary stations. The missions house is the word that was used. The missionaries operated within the Indian caste system, which is a semi-official religious social system. You have what are today called the Dalits, or what in the past have been called untouchables, and that was the group towards which Christian missionaries focused, because they had most to gain from Christianity. So if you look at it from a Christian theological point of view, everyone's equal, whereas within the Hindu caste system, it's not quite as straightforward as that. They tend not to target Muslims, and they would never target Sikhs, because that's not an area where they're going to succeed. And even in higher castes of Indians, they wouldn't succeed. They develop intermediaries who do the preaching for them, and then gradually they develop knowledge of the local languages, and then they go out and preach for themselves. So it's quite a complex process involving both the Germans and people they've converted. One of the things that's really striking is the death rate of the missionaries, especially in the early 19th century. And then as the century progresses, the death rate declines. That's the first aspect of their everyday life. Many of them leave quite quickly. Most of them are there for less than 10 years. You have a few who are there for 30 years. In one sense, they are like the British in India. They construct their own European-style accommodation. While they're missionaries, they still have Indian servants, and so they still buy into all that. They need Indians in order to explore, I guess is the phrase I'm looking for. Some of the most fascinating stuff is when they turn up in a square and start preaching. And so there's one description from Alvin Gehring, who's a Leipzig missionary, who says people start jeering and start pushing him. He should have known he was preaching in the wrong area, because he was preaching outside an enormous Hindu temple. So I guess that's why that happened. So the reception can be quite hostile if you start preaching in the wrong areas. The relationship between German missionaries and structures of imperialism isn't what one would think it might be, because They have virtually nothing to do with British imperial power. I mean, I guess the Raj lets them into the country in order to preach, and that's it. Apart from that, they have nothing to do with British imperialism. They just happen to be in a place where British imperial power operates. Once the First World War breaks out, you have a global campaign within the British Empire led from London against Germans. And so the most visible group, but not the only German group in India, is the Missionaries. In a sense, the Missionaries are treated a bit more generously than some of the other Germans. So some of them face incarceration for a short period of time at the beginning of the war, but then the government decides that it's going to deport them. Most of them are gone by the middle of 1916, but Germans remain in India as internees until the very end of the war, especially focused on this really significant camp in Ahmednagar. And Ahmednagar also takes in Germans from other parts of the world. By the end of the First World War, the German missionary organizations have become Indianized, for want of a better phrase, and the government of India also passes legislation saying Germans can't enter for 5 years and after the end of the war, but then they do start coming back. The main consequence of the First World War is the deportation and the Indianization, I think, of these German missionary organizations. The way to understand the activities of the German missionaries in India is that as they propagandize, they impact on individual lives, and they claim that they change the lives for the better of hundreds of thousands of Indians. And I guess if you're, let's take a neutral perspective on this. If Indians hadn't come in contact with these German missionaries, they wouldn't have had an education. They wouldn't, in many cases, have experienced social mobility. They wouldn't have had care if they were lepers. So they had a positive impact on the lives of hundreds of thousands of Indians. And what this book does is it illustrates this both through the text and through pictures that are provided of the impact of German missionaries. For the lives of these hundreds of thousands of India, it just completely transformed their lives. And I guess, if we're thinking about what gives us joy as historians about writing, it's just looking at these individual lives and, in this case, how they were transformed.